Welcome to Non-Human Entities YouTube channel. Please subscribe, like, and share if you enjoy this show.
Bob, are you there?
I hope so. How are you?
Doing real good, and super happy to have you join us again. Boy, oh boy, are things heating up out there. My goodness, it looks like the... Have you seen? I mean,
it's been a long time. Yeah, it really has. I have not been doing a lot of interviews for quite a while, and there's a reason for it, as a matter of fact. I've been working on an extraordinary a new report, and it started out simple, and then it got complex, and it has turned into the biggest project I've ever done, actually, and I've done more things than 10 people in a school bus. This has turned out into to being an extraordinary program that I've been working on. It's a new DVD expose. Hopefully, within hopefully 30 days, I will have this completed. And I believe it or not, I have actually worked on this for 2 years.
Wow.
And I'm talking about most people are not in a position, not necessarily that I like being in that position, but I'm in a position where if I say I've been working on something, it means literally that I have been doing it it was my only job in the world, and I've been doing it for 6 days a week for 2 years. And that's how unbelievably complex and et cetera. And I'm not going to get into, I don't want to get into exactly what it is, other than I will say generally it's like a library of government corruption. It's probably because of my physical condition and my age, this is probably the last one that I will be doing. I've had, it's a combination of the technical research and investigative research I've had to do, but then also technical education that I had to get into once I got flipping over the rocks on this thing. And I'll tell you what, generally, and the only reason I don't want to get into like what it is about in specifics or anything like that, it's not physically ready. I don't want anybody. A lot of people want to, say, hey, put my name down. I want to be first on the mailing list. When you get it done, let me know, etc. I don't want to do that because I don't want to get in a position where I may have to send a couple hundred or 1,000 people notes back and saying, hey, it's not going to happen. So until it's physically done, so to speak, on the table, I'm just not going to get into particulars. I will say one thing. It will be historic, literally. It is that amazing. It will be a historic expose. Now, for a lot of people that may not know who I am, and that's possible, I probably should maybe give folks kind of a general idea, and then if you wish, we can. What I'd like to talk about, I think, because I, of course, had this extraordinary amount of notoriety relative to Planet X and Nibiru and Planet X making its biblical return, so to speak. And when I did that, which was literally about 2 years ago, in that I had put several things that I hate to use the term, but actually were predictions, or maybe a better way would be scientific calculations of what we should expect. When I put that out, I said in the next few years that we're going to have the following things will happen. And when I started my new project that I was just referring to, it was actually started out very simple as a follow-up to what I had done, and a follow-up showing the things that have actually taken place that I did, in fact, predict or calculate would happen. And that's been a tremendous amount of amazing things, and a lot of people probably don't realize it, or had maybe even not, have missed the fact that things have happened that are directly related to the potential incoming of Nibiru, or a similar external galactic problem, and an awful lot has happened, and that's what we can kind of talk about. But for the people that don't know, I don't normally do things of that nature. The Planet X has always been kind of like a mystical kind of a thing. Was it real? Was it not? Scientists have talked about it for, I guess, 100 years, and astronomers. It's one of those things that if you can't see it, it's kind of spooky. If this thing is out there and as devastating, potentially devastating to the globe as it could be, then it's kind of like, why can't we see it now? And maybe it doesn't even exist, etc. So that project that I started literally 2 years ago, I can't believe it's been that long. And during that 2 years, by the way, I would say this: I had, not only was there a tremendous amount of research and extreme technical education for myself, because I don't like talking about things if I don't know what I'm talking about, because that makes me a news reporter, I think. If you're out there talking about something and you really don't know what you're talking about, it makes you probably somebody working for the major media. But what took place when I got started on this new project is, first off, several things. One is I realized that I did have to get into this extraordinary educational program for myself. I had to call on people I hadn't called on in many years, people in getting information from people in the government and from scientific arenas and the astronomic area, as well as many other very highly technical areas in our government, particularly the corrupted top secret part of our government. And then once I got started doing all of this work and research and working on the new films, which, by the way, will probably be a small handful of DVDs. It's not going to be just one or two. It's probably going to end up actually being 4 discs in this new report. That's how complicated it became. But what also happened was that we had an unbelievable amount of hacking, people coming in and messing with my computer system, which even included one computer that actually was what they call fried, externally hacked and totally destroyed. I had to replace the entire system, and I had a technician, because I don't tend to be a computer wizard, and I had a technician come in later and try to replace what they call the motherboard on one of my computers. And when he ordered it in and it arrived, he came back with it from his location and opened the package here at my location, and he actually was overwhelmed because somebody had actually messed with the product before he even had received it. Or somebody had gotten into the motherboard that was actually a replacement board and boogered it up before we even got it into the computer. So I was amazed, and when he did a backup run on my system, he told me that there was at least, in a period of a year, there had been at least 1,000 external hacks. I've never had that kind of profuse interruption with any project I've been working on in 30 years. Of course, we didn't have computers that long, but not as going back 30 years, I never had that much interference. So I really hit a nerve with some of the material that's in the new report that we're doing. So and by the way, if you have any questions, please jump in on me at any time. If anything comes to your mind.
Oh yeah, amen. No, go ahead.
Yeah.
I don't want to interrupt you, but
okay,
if something
so
does.
Anyhow, that was again this project became so complex. Like I said, with the information I had to get, and what I have included in it is so sensitive that I really wanted to make sure it was right, and that was a big part of the time involved. I get up and start in the morning and close down in the evening, working on these projects back to back. And so if I say I've been spending that much time, it literally has been that much time. But to get to, and again, I kind of interrupted my own thought process there, but to fill in the people that didn't know myself at all, so to speak, I do have a website that's probably does a better job of the background, so to speak, on Bob Fletcher, and it's called, it's titled or labeled Bob Fltecher Investigations.com for you folks that are computer-oriented. So it's BobFletcherInvestigations.com. You can go on there, and now you kind of get a complete, good, thorough sort of a background on who I am. But I have been chasing corrupted government for literally 30 years at this point. I've been a federal witness over the period of that time. It's included testimony before the United States Senate Intelligence Committee. It includes working behind the scenes as an investigator, assisting over the years a few what I would call honest or at least attempting to be honest congressmen and senators with major investigations that included illegal guns, drug smuggling, assassinations, murders, and things of that nature. I'm not talking about small level. I'm talking about working directly with congressional and Senate investigators and the Congress and senators. I had even been hired by Manuel Noriega's lawyers when they were doing his trial a few years back, the dictator that was arrested for the drugs and all of that when we invaded Noriega's country of Panama, actually, when they went in there, and it was there's a lot of bad stories in the back of that thing. But if you want to if you want to look at a scary, bothersome DVD expose done by other people than myself relative to that, if you look up a DVD film called The Panama Deception, and you will be shocked to find out that first off, the idea of invading Panama is kind of ludicrous anyhow, if you think about it. My thought on the humorous side was, I was envisioning small groups of militia people in Panama throwing pineapples at our soldiers as we came in with the U-2 bombers, or the new bombers, the stealth bombers, and bombed Panama and attacked them utilizing experimental weapons at that time. As a matter of fact, if you want to really get upset, in this program called Panama Deception, they clearly show where they literally were shooting citizens, private citizens, and of course the few small members of their military in Panama at that time. They were shooting these people with experimental ray guns and actually melting human beings in their own vehicles, private citizens. And this is stuff that, of course, you never see or hear about. But if you want to look that up, it's called Panama Deception. It's a very troubling DVD expose that was put together. It was very good. But I had actually been, back when Noriega was on trial, I had been actually hired by his lawyers, and the intent was they wanted me to do because they knew I had the information, they wanted me to do a complete report on the connections into the White House of drug operations during the Bush administrations. and which, again, unfortunately, I was a federal witness in several of those inquiries on the investigative side, and the amount of information I sent him was apparently pretty shocking, because what happened, I found out after being hired by this lawyer group out of Miami who was representing Noriega. I found out that that entire group, it appears, was completely involved with the U.S. government in their prosecution of Noriega, behind Noriega's back. So obviously what I supplied him was ended up not being used as it was supposed to be. I wanted to expose those criminal people in our own government. I didn't care two hoots about Noriega, of course, because he was what he was. He was a dictator, and he was a criminal leader. But the material I sent to him would have actually impeached people in the White House. So obviously that didn't go too far. Another upsetting piece of investigations that I did was with Sonny Bono. And Sonny, I worked with him for about a year, putting together a same type of situation. I was supplying him and had already supplied him with devastating inside documentation and evidence on drug connections and illegal arms, and even including murders relative or connected directly into the White House. And Sonny, I had worked along with him for just a little less than a year. I guess it was 9-10 months. And we finally were ready for a major congressional inquiry that he had finally got the approval on. And we had kept it very much under the table and rather quiet. The amazing thing about this inquiry was that Sonny had been able to get the approval of subpoena power for the congressional inquiry. Now, normally, they do not do that. You can't get subpoena power, because what that does is whoever you call, even if it was the Vice President of the United States, if you call them to testify, they have to testify, and if they balk or they stop or they back out or anything like that, you actually can put them in jail. Of course, the president or vice president may be a little different, but you could put the people that are been called up to testify can actually be put in jail under subpoena if, in fact, they refuse to talk. So this was rather unique, and Sonny had put it together finally. He called me. His people called me. I was living in Los Angeles at the time. Sonny called me and said, "Hey, as soon as I'm back from the Christmas holidays, it's going to be about 15 days. When I get back to Washington, we're going to open up the investigation. The inquiry will be live broadcast on C-SPAN and, of course, everybody else." And wanted to make sure I was ready to fly into Washington, D.C. with the rest of my material, which, of course, he already had all of it himself, and to be ready to testify. I said yes, and I was really excited because I had been involved with several of these, and they always fall on, they always get covered up, they get closed down, or they don't quite find enough information, so nothing really happens on these congressional investigations. And I had seen so many of them fall apart, and with Sonny, he was a guy that could not be pressured, he could not be paid off. They had done real numbers on him, trying to get him to not do this, including even I went into his office one day in Washington, and all of the office was pulled apart. And I said, "What's going on?" And there were guys on ladders and all the rest of that up in the ceilings, and they had hotwired. They had been listening in and tapping in on Sonny Bono's entire office. They had implanted listening devices throughout the entire office. And of course, these are things that you never hear about. And of course, now things have gotten so bad, you don't hear anything about anything that's worth any startling news. You're just not going to hear it at all anyhow. And so anyhow, upsettingly, within they had called me. I said, great, let's do it. And a couple of days later, they murdered Sonny on the ski slopes, told everybody he had run into a tree, and he was dead. And that was the end of it. It really actually would have been like 6 more days when he was killed. It was about 6 more days. He would have been back in Washington, and we would have had probably one of the biggest inquiries in the history of congressional investigations. And, of course, Sonny was dead, and that was the end of it. And what I left out was that a few months prior to that, actually, possibly 6 or 9 months, something like that, before they killed Sonny, there was an attempt on my life in my home. I actually was hit in my home, a sound while I was sleeping about 1:30 in the morning, an attempt to kill me. Of course, and it didn't mean half as much as that time as it did, in fact, when they killed Sonny several months later on the ski slopes. And I worked with Sonny's mother and the lawyer for the family. It took us a long time to even get, for Sonny's own mother, to even get the autopsy. And when I finally got the autopsy, again, working with her and her lawyer, etc., I did a full investigation on it. The bottom line is that apparently Sonny was pistol whipped, hit over the head with the barrel of a 9mm semi-automatic pistol, all about the same size, and he had been struck a couple of times in the head and dragged his body up against a tree and make it look like he had run into a tree and by accident and killed himself, and of course, unfortunately, that was not the fact. He was literally murdered. And again, of course, it's something even with the best people that may have been able to help in that investigation, coincidentally or not, as people may or may not know, Sonny's wife ended up running and replacing him. Sonny Bono's wife, who actually didn't have any congressional background at all, but she took over Sonny's offices, and unbeknownst to most people was that Sonny was about to have a divorce, and so any assistance she might have lent to me in the investigations would not have been beneficial to her. And so not to say that she was connected with anything, but she certainly was not helpful, and we unable to get any place. People just didn't want to open that can of worms, the idea that Sonny had been assassinated to stop this investigation. Whatever, it's something at the congressional and Senate inquiry level, they really try to avoid anything that's that outrageous. But anyhow, so much for that. And I utilize that only to explain to folks that my background has been, and I also was a candidate for the United States Congress in 1990, again, without any name recognition or without any multi-millions of dollars. Of course, it was strictly almost a vendetta type situation. I was running against Mr. Bill McCullum, who had been the congressional representative from the Orlando area where I had been living, and had also been involved with the Iran-Contra investigations in terms of actually recruiting mercenaries for that whole Iran-Contra business in his offices, and that was part of some of the federal information that I had given at the federal level when I got involved with being a federal witness. It was part of my own discovery, And so later on in 1990, that investigation was like 87, 89, that period of time, and that was with Oliver North, which people are familiar with and all that, with the drug smuggling and illegal arms and things of that sort. Oliver North, as a matter of fact, see, these are things that people, if you're not kind of don't have your thumb on the inside, you just will not even hear about. But Oliver North was actually found guilty in the country of Costa Rica, which was involved with the Iran-Contra business. Oliver North was found guilty of drug smuggling, murder, and conspiracy to commit murder in that country, and can never go back to that country. If he did, he would be put in prison. And it's a little thing, that people just don't even know. And the bottom line is, here he's on television on a regular basis, people still touting him as some kind of a military hero, when in fact he actually had been involved with murder and drug smuggling in the Iran-Contra business. And some of the paperwork, actual documentation that I supplied the Iran-Contra inquiry about, the Congress and the Senate, included his handwritten notes to himself as a reminder, handwritten in his own little notepad that said to remember to supply an aircraft to move 1,500 kilos of cocaine mash, and that was in his handwriting. And, of course, his other paperwork out of his safe, which I was able to get the copies of very early in that inquiry and passed it on to people in Washington, included obvious talking about drug smuggling and supplying aircraft and doing what was necessary, and working with a fellow that was an agent down there in Costa Rica as a drop point. And what was going on with that Iran-Contra business basically was the Central Intelligence and the National Security Agency and other intelligence agencies were utilizing, as they usually do, or quite often do, using drug money to fund covert, secret intelligence operations, including throwing people out of countries and overthrowing governments and things of that sort. And that was the crux of that whole thing anyhow. But those were the things that I have done for the last 20 years now, 30 years altogether. And so when it came, I'm going to go back to the Nibiru, the Nibiru DVD that I did, the expose on the incoming of Planet X. And I tell you that all that things that I was just telling you as to set you up so that you would understand that, in fact, things like Planet X, et cetera, those are not things that I normally was involved with. Most all of my investigations have been very obviously heavy-duty governmental corruption exposés, and like I say, including being the federal witness in several cases. And so Planet X or something of that type was just not on my calendar. Those certainly were not something I got into. And a couple of years ago, what had happened, I started looking into the unbelievable loss of money. I'm talking about big money. Now, I had investigated several times for different inquiries the loss of, let's say, a couple $1 million here, or some congressional or senatorial person taking money and sneaking money out the back door. Those types of investigations were pretty commonplace. Guys, senators and congressmen had spent millions of dollars flying to different foreign countries and putting it on, padding the bill and getting the government to pay for holidays and prostitutes and crazy things in foreign countries and all of that. And some of them actually with like homes in multi-million-dollar homes in Tahiti, where they were stealing a couple $1 million here, a couple $1 million there, and that kind of thing, which unfortunately it goes on probably more regular than what you would call a good congressional work. That kind of activity is probably almost more active than actually doing good congressional or senatorial work. And so a couple of people had come to me and said, and this is a couple of years ago now, they had come to me and said, hey, look at all this money. Excuse me, I have a frog in my throat here. Let me take a drink, as a matter of fact, and see if I can drown it. Okay, hold on a second here.
Yes, of course.
Okay, excuse me. So, anyhow, I had a couple people come and contact me and said, hey, there's a tremendous amount of money that's just disappearing all over the place for the last 5 or 10 years. I mean, it's just, and my first thing, of course, was, how much, what are we talking about? And a couple of guys said, we're talking like billions of dollars, not 150,000 being padded on somebody's vacation, but we're talking about millions of dollars. And then it got up to where it was billions of dollars that literally were vanishing out of government budgets. And then the one that really got under my skin was when Donald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense, a few years back, sat down before, well, now it's a long time, which is why we're talking 15 years ago. He sat down before the United States Senate testifying on budget and things of that sort, and he said that he had lost, that's the way he termed it, out of the Defense Department, $2.3 trillion. And that's with a T. And basically just said, we don't know where it is. We don't know where it's gone. And around the same period of time, there was a lady that was testifying relative to the international banking and international funding, et cetera, overseas by the government. And she said there had been, I think it was $9 trillion. Again, this is with a T, that had vanished, and that her response to an inquiry was that she just didn't know for sure where it went. It went to some European banks, but she just wasn't sure where it went or what banks had gotten it. And when I saw this, now this is live testimony, it's on television, and I thought, holy mackerel, what are we talking about here? We're talking, and we're not talking about a couple $1 million, which to me, you and I and most of the listening audience, that would be a lot of money. And then it moved up to billions, and now we're talking trillions. And this is mind-boggling because, of course, a big part of the overview on corruption in Americans' government is what they call the New World Order. It's this intent of a small number of people in the world to ending up where they're controlling every single thing in America and other countries, and again, marking it the New World Order with the concept, artificially painting this as some kind of a wonderful thing. We'd be living one big, happy family around the globe and all of that, which, of course, on the out front, the basics of that is a socialistic, communistic kind of a concept, which doesn't work anyhow. But the bottom line is it, again, brings to our mind the realization that it's only this small 10% of the wealthiest people in the world literally control like 90% of all of the wealth of the earth. Goes back to just this small 10% of people, which is really startling when you actually realize that's how crazy the globe is financially. So that's the New World Order, and all these upper echelon families have been pursuing this for like 100 years. It literally is a hand-me-down type of a situation, where granddaddy does it, and then the father does it, and then the sons do it, and then the sons of the sons, the great-grandchildren, carry on this intent of taking the world and putting it into one big bank account. So that's why when I found out that there was billions and trillions vanishing at the highest level of our funds, I said, I took it on. I said, okay, let me look into this. Let me find out what's going on. And here's the point. The big point is you can't, if you're a thief, or you're a drug smuggler, you're a gun smuggler, you're a whatever at that highest level, you can't money launder $1 trillion. Big drug smugglers, they take multi-millions, and they got to bounce it around between 3 or 4 different banks in an opportunity to launder that money so they can use it, finally get it back into their own usage. But if you just stop and think, you don't have to be a mathematician to realize, since they have bank regulations that says, that if you bring in more than $10,000 every month or two into an account of some sort, they're going to turn you to the IRS and everybody else. That's just kind of standing laws and regulations. So how in the world is anybody going to take $20 billion or $1 trillion and launder it? You can't do it. So that was my first interesting point when I started looking into what was going on with the money. And so I started, and by the way, this is all related to Nibiru, incoming Planet X. So again, at that point, it was strictly a political inquiry that I was doing. And I started getting, I put out questions and people were, responding, and I was getting information from 100 different directions, which is what usually happens when I get into turning over these rocks, because a lot of people are willing to give you information, but they damn well don't want to be the person to come out and put their name on it. They don't have the nerve to go out and say, here's what I found, or here's what I know. They don't have any trouble telling somebody else, here's what I know. Now you go put your head into the noose and go ahead and investigate it, but I'm not going to do anything, but I'll give you all the paperwork. And so that happens quite often. So several people came to me and started saying, hey, I think where the money's going is into the underground secret facilities, underground operations, these entire top secret hideouts in the United States. And I had known a little bit about that back many years ago, going back even to 1994. I had gotten several people had sent to me films, DVD. At that time it was not DVDs, but it was actually videotapes, but videotapes of underground facilities where these truck drivers had orders to deliver huge truckloads of things into these underground facilities in many states around the country. And it's typically something that I scoffed at originally. I said, what are you talking about? The guy say, hey, I went into a location, I was supposed to deliver goods, and a trap door opened up behind a building, and I drove down into this underground facility, and I drove for 15 miles to deliver underground in these huge underground facilities. And again, now this is like 94, that period of time, and I was so busy doing other things at that time that I didn't get seriously into it. But that was my first heads up on the underground operations. So then when I looked into to try to get the realization of this thing, I got unbelievable films and locations and documentation and all the rest of that. And the bottom line was, I discovered that we had and had been building them for several years, but in the last 20 years, 15 years, they had expended gigantic amount of money, and we had 103 underground facilities in the United States of America, and they were top secret. You know, I mean, you just couldn't get into them. I mean, if you got into them, if you had, you know, a requisition, and we're delivering freeze-dried foods, the storage of freeze-dried foods, which was by the way, you know, millions of tons of this stuff being brought into these underground facilities, and they were being put in a few years ago on an emergency situation where the FEMA had actually requested the manufacturers of manufacturers of the freeze-dried foods, emergency rescue foods, FEMA put out a request and wanted to know how many tons and how quickly they could supply for the United States government all of this underground, filling up these underground facilities with these foodstuffs, survival foods. So we got all of that, and I opened my inquiry going out beyond the United States, and I found that around the globe, every major country, including Russia and China, and of course the European nations, had been doing the same thing, and they had been building underground facilities that were entire cities, if you will, underground, and they were being done. Russians had built one location that, off the top of my head, if I remember right, the biggest one could hold 50,000 people underground in the mountainside down underground in Russia. China had one that was large, but the Russians had put out a mandate that they had about 5-year window to have, I think it was 5,000 underground facilities of smaller sizes, not all gigantic, like big enough to be a city, but 5,000 of these completed underground facilities, hideouts, I call them, is what they actually are, for the elite. So the next obvious question is, because the idea 10, 20 years ago, the idea of actually having a nuclear event between the nations. See, and right now we got that crazy North Korean guy, so that's a very real possibility, probably more so real than it had been in 50 years in the United States, just because he's a loose cannon. You know, he's seriously mentally ill, which is inherited from his granddad down to his father. You know, it's been a hand-me-down dictatorship there in North Korea, and he's crazy. That sucker will end up doing something unless we end up stopping him ahead of time. But to get back to it, the idea of a nuclear conflict between any of the major nations, China, Russia, or America, it had been diminished to a very, very small, realistic concern. It didn't amount to much. So the question was, why in the world were the major nations of the world drilling and cutting down inside mountains and building entire self-sustaining cities underground? And so that was the big question. And I started putting out feelers all over the place at different levels of in America. Well, actually, several around the world. And finally, all of a sudden, 2 or 3 people said that this Planet X Nibiru has been finally confirmed sufficiently to the government heads of the world of the likelihood of its return, come passing close enough to Earth to cause Noah's floods over again. And the implication being that the original floods of Noah were probably caused by an event like Nibiru passing close enough that it completely disrupts the Earth, everything, the gravity and everything you can imagine. And I'll get into that a little bit. But so that was the answer. All of a sudden, the light came on. Okay, so here's all of this money being stolen, disappearing from the budget. And, of course, some of it they can label as covert black operations money, which technically is – see, that's funny. When they get the approval on this stuff with the Senate and the Congress for covert operations of any sort, and the budgeting for it, let's say working on a new weapon or things of that sort, when that happens, the Senate and the Congress, they do not know what the money's really for. They call it Operation Aurora or whatever, Operation Hidden Planet or Operation Unknown or something like that. And they love doing all that childish stuff on titles, as a matter of fact. They never quite grew up out of that science fiction kind of concept. But they really don't know. If you sat down with a senator or congressman, there's these little levels of secrecy. Most of the senators and congressmen are not cleared for top secret or secret. And again, I was a candidate for Congress, and I completely have a handle on that. And as a matter of fact, there are even levels of secrecy in the government that are called institutional classifications that are not shared with the President of the United States. And there's a reason for it, and it's only under an absolute quote-unquote need to know for even the President. Because if you'll follow what I'm about to say and you'll understand why that has to be, the presidents basically, they come in for 4 years, or they come in for 8 years, if they're able to con the people to thinking they need them another 4 years. But they're only there for 4 years. So why would you have this project, let's say, even top secret, working on, let's say, a weapon of sorts for a period of 7 or 8, 10, 12 years, still being worked on, and put it into the hands of some fella that's going to pass through the White House for 4 years? So they actually have institutional top secret, above top secret, that even the President of the United States is not been read in. They don't know it. So I just mention that as a kind of a surprising point, but it's very logical, and that goes on all the time. So in terms of funding, the top secret funding, it gets approved. They see a title, a small number of senators or congressmen on the higher levels of the intelligence committees. They know, or let me put it this way, they think they know what the funds are used for, but the reality is it's very difficult to track them. And so they can shuffle money from one operation to another. They can alter the books, steal money, and put it in places that Senate and Congress just don't know where it even is. And I know I personally had come across secret and top secret information. I can remember going into, back in the 90s, going into the office of the chief legal counsel for the House Foreign Affairs Committee and handing him papers, 75 pages of documents. I thought he was going to fall off his chair, and it was relative to a very specific special inquiry. And he told me, he said, his reaction was, "Oh my God, where did you get this?" And I've never even seen this. I had known nothing about this. And then when he went over it, later he told me they're going to use this in the investigation that it was referencing. And he said, but they will all be classified secret, and they will be printed on blank white pages when the final report comes out. All of your material will be classified. And I was just some little guy, so to speak, a little investigator way out in the Never Land, and came into the Capitol building with that stuff in my briefcase. So anyhow, it's when I find out that a senator or a congressman doesn't know something, it does not surprise me that much, particularly now that I've done it for so many years. But so let me get back to my journey through the discovery of the Planet X Nibiru. So once I realized that the likelihood of 103 top secret underground facilities that are so extraordinary that they are like luxury cities underground in the United States. They are interconnected with railways, the maglev railroad operations that travel 400 miles an hour like a subway, but they're all magnetically supported and driven electronically, and they connected. Several of the 103 operations are connected from state to state by these railways. Additionally, they are connected by driveways, roads, if you will, that are suitable for 18-wheel trucks that can come into Texas and go all the way into Louisiana underground on roadways. And by the way, in the DVD that I put out on Planet X, on Nibiru, which is titled Incoming, in that DVD I have all of the documentation, all of the information, and photographs of everything I'm talking about. Everything. They even have some of the underground facilities. A few of them are designed exclusively for growing foodstuffs underground, and then they can be trucked on the highways from one location to the other, so that you can actually have food grown underground in a facility exclusively for underground farming and deliver foods to support people in the extreme emergency 1,000 miles away from where they were grown, and never come up on the top of the ground at all, never come above surface. So, can I give myself a break here for a minute and let you run with either a question or two or whatever you may have in mind?
Oh, sure. As a matter of fact, one of the things I was going to contribute was in the Book of Enoch. There's I believe it's chapter 65 or I forget exactly but it has a quote, and you can search it on the internet. And the quote goes like this: "And Noah had seen the earth had tilted, and knew that destruction was near." And that's really fascinating. Yeah, that's really fascinating when you look at Revelation 6:12, and you see in verse 13. I'm sorry, Revelation 6 verse 13 and 14 and 15. In those scriptures right there, you'll see. First you see. The stars fall from the sky like a fig tree shaken like a mighty wind. So there's your meteor showers. And then you see right after that, every island and mountain was moved out of place. Right.
And as a matter of fact, let me do this now. It's kind of getting all the miscellaneous technical, kind of a background to let everyone know kind of how I got into this thing. And I want to say one more kind of a technical thing, and then I want to talk a little bit about what we will have to expect when Nibiru or the planet unknown, Planet X, does this close pass, and how things will take place. But let me mention this part. When I was talking about, which was extraordinary, the numbers that are so outrageous, this $2 or $3 trillion that Donald Rumsfeld, this was on the floor of the Congress or the Senate, under sworn testimony, and he said he lost it. They don't know where it is. Of course, he was lying. He knew where it was, but for him to admit that it was gone was a big shocker, because that's a single pretty big box of money, when you get talking trillions. But that was announced officially on the floor of the congressional hearings by Donald Rumsfeld, the Defense Department chief, the day before 9/11. All of the records related to that and his inquiry, or everything related to the financials on the vanishing of this money, was in and burned up in the Pentagon when it was hit on 9/11. This was the following day, all right? And there's a specific reason why that happened and why the coincidence, because it was not coincidental. But nonetheless, the point is this. So, because everybody says, well, did anybody go any farther with that? What happened? Did they just drop that? I mean, he came in and said, well, all this money, he can't find it, and then everybody forgot about it? The answer to that question is yes. And the reason was the serious reason was the best documentation on it was burned up in the office that was hit on the 9/11 at the Pentagon. And of course, the other reason was America went into such a turmoil immediately following. It just was that information of his was just dropped into the garbage can, and that was the end of it. So there was no follow-up on that whatsoever. So here's what happens. Now the next point for myself was I knew nothing about Planet X. Planet X and Nibiru and whatever you want to call it, but those are the primary two names for it. It was totally off of my target. I knew nothing about it. I had very little, maybe a little bit education on it, but that was just random peripheral knowledge that I had picked up over the years, but maybe a little more than average just because of having my finger in the pie in Washington. But other than that, I didn't know much more than the average fellow out there. So I immediately got into an investigative mode strictly to find out because before I put my name on an investigation that's talking about Planet X, it's kind of like Space Rangers kind of stuff. And before I put my name on that, I darn well was going to make sure that, in fact, I knew what I was talking about. So I started doing serious snooping, contacted and got with some folks that had been following this for years, actually almost like a career, tracking what was going on with this unknown planet and why it was not readily seen. What's the deal with that? How come not everybody knows about it? How come it's not talked about, in college and university on a regular basis, et cetera, et cetera? So here's what I found. First off, I for one thing, I located enough astronomers and legitimate information from the astronomy side of it, that in fact, yes, this probably is absolutely real. And the extraordinary part, the first thing that struck me, was that they said it was on this like a 300 to 3,000 year orbit, and that it was a planet approximately 5 times the size of Earth, with 5 different moons of its own, having moons circling it as it goes around on its huge orbit. Now, when you're talking about an orbit that's in the thousands of years, again, because of myself not being an astronomer, I almost am one at this time, but at that time I certainly didn't know much about it, and it struck me amazing. I said, wait a minute, you mean it's more than it's potentially a 3,000 or a 300 year, and is there conflict between a couple of groups there as to whether it's 300 or 3,000. and there's very good reasons for that. I won't get into all of that gobbledygook, but there is a question as to it could be either one. But my question was, we're talking 1,000 years. Holy mackerel! I can't imagine that something has enough orbital continuity to go out and around in that long period of time and come back again in the same general direction and then disappear for another, let's just use the middle of the road, 1,000 years. All right, and so to me that was mind-boggling. But then I found out it was right under my nose. Of course, we have Halley's Comet that does which now, of course, this is a difference between a comet and a planet is really radical. But here we have Halley's Comet, comes around. You can set your clock by it almost. It's a 75-year orbit. It goes out, comes around. We see it every 75 years, give or take a couple of days on the calendar, and it goes around and zips back out to Neverland, and we'll be back in 75 years. So then I realized that we only a few years ago had discovered a particular orbiting, I'll call it a comet. That's what they refer to it as. Another comet that was 4,200 years, and we didn't even know about it. And then all of a sudden it showed up. They did the mathematics on it, and the son of a gun, yes, they said this is going to be coming back again and coming around in 4,200 years. So automatically I said, oh, okay, so that's that kind of a potential long orbital configuration on the Planet X is not some stupid random science fiction thing. That's a reality. So, all right, so now what we have is this planet the size, 5 times the size of Earth. Why can't we see it, and where would it be? So then I got put that information, that request out to people that know and have it as part of their career. And the bottom line is it is, in fact, an infrared planet, and which, by the way, in the last few years, we have discovered thousands of infrared planets and physical bodies out there, all right? Because now with every year, over the last 10 years, with the new telescopes we have and what have you, that we now can see these things and locate them much more specifically than we used to be able to do. So we have an infrared, non-visible planet that will not be visible until it is seen in the sky, and it will appear as a star, because it will, for the first time in 1,000 or 3,000 years, it will be for the first time reflecting our sun. And so there it will be seen when it arrives. It will be seen as a star, and then it will get progressively bigger from the time we see it as a star, and it starts to get, all the astronomers now, every amateur and professional, everybody and their mother's going to see that thing once it starts coming in close enough, and it will get bigger and bigger and bigger. It will probably be seen, and the reason this figures now that I'm talking about comes from previous writings and visitations or sightings of this visitation of Planet X or Nibiru over the last 1,000 years, that has been documented several times by certain cultures and societies. Some of it included paintings on walls of caves that represents it. Some of it includes, there's a whole variety of other things, but some of it is biblical, like you were referring to, out of our own Christian Bible, and some of it's in the Buddhist monks on the Himalayan, the top of the Himalayan mountains, where they tracked it. The Chinese emperor, back several hundred years ago, his astronomers tracked it. So it's been here several times. When it comes by, the very nature of its size, because it's assumed to be, because also it does indicate to be red with a tail. Or indicates like when it's passed around back in the old scriptural writings that it was appeared to be red, glowing red, and dragging a tail behind it. That is believed to be probably, it may be iron for the most part, with that then being the red that it's dragging would be dust, iron dust, and the bulk of the planet itself may in fact be of iron. So therein gives its color, the reason for the tail, and all of that. So what happens now, what will happen as this arrives, it will be seen most likely because of all of the previous scriptures and writings on this thing. It will be seen in December when it first is seen as a star. It will progressively get larger as it comes closer. It's not going to hit the Earth. It will pass in a manner such that it comes in and in. Let's see, it was around the time of Passover, March and April, around that period of time, is when it will probably make its physical, damaging close pass. And here, I'm going to fill you in generally what we would expect this thing to do. When it comes in, it comes around, goes around the sun before, actually, by the time it's seen as a star, we will start to get a tremendous amount of physical activity in our solar system in general. Now, I want to stop myself right here now and go back a bit. In the DVD that I initially put out on this, which is still available, as a matter of fact, but in the DVD, it's titled Incoming. It can be found at the Bob Fletcher Investigations.com on your computer. I stated several things, and I hesitated doing it because it fell into, as I said earlier in the program, it fell into the idea of predictions and and I'm not a psychic. It's nothing done, and I don't read tea leaves or count how many lizards ran up the side of a mountain or anything like that to make predictions. This is based on information from the past, and what I said was 2 years ago, I said the next 2 years, which is the last two we've just passed through, all right, I said there will be huge effects on the planetary, on our planetary system. The planets will be starting to be closer. It is functioning a little bit like a bowling ball going into a bunch of pins way out in the outer space, but it's punching its way through what normally is a settled environment in our planetary structure. And as it punches through, it will be moving things in front of it and behind it and around it, so it will start causing effect like dropping a stone on the edge of a small pond. If you drop a stone in it, it's going to send ripples out all the way across to the other side and back again. And that's what it's already started. Now, what I said, for one thing, was that it would affect the planets. Now, as we look today, all of the planets are being affected by an unknown entity. Of course, this is stuff, you're not going to hear this on the news, period, end of story. And I will explain very simply why that's going to be. You will hear a little bit about it, like if you will hear about incoming meteoric increases in meteors around the Earth, near and coming into. That's happening. The increase in volcanic activity is happening. We have more live volcanic actions than we've had in 100 years. All around the globe, we have the melting of the ice caps, both top and bottom. The glaciers are melting more rapidly, and they will continue to melt more rapidly. But they now, compared to just 2 years ago, 4, 5, 8, 10 years ago, the glaciers and the ice caps are melting like you dropped an ice cube in a hot plate of water. That's how bad it is, folks. And I'll tell you how realistically bad it is. Miami, Florida, that's a long ways from either the South or the North Pole. But Miami, Florida, 2 years ago, were forced to put in I'm thinking it was $40 million in pumps in the Miami Beach area, because on the regular high tide, every time they had a high tide starting a couple of years ago, it flooded 3, 4, 5 blocks into Miami Beach with normal high tides. That, folks, literally is from the increase of the water coming from the melting of the north and south and the glaciers. That's how much water is being introduced. It's affecting, and the state of Florida has had to spend multi-millions of dollars in putting pumps to automatically control the water on the regular high tides in Miami Beach. And that's, again, everything I say, you can look it up. You look it up, find out, if what the meteor showers, the numbers of meteor storms and things of that, how many there are, look it up. Volcanic activity, look it up. 40, 50, 60 volcanoes are now actively blowing up every 30 or 60 days. The changes in the weather, this extraordinary weather that we have watched now for the last 2 years, which includes freezing when it's not supposed to, floods. Last week, people are dying with huge floods in the middle of the United States. All right? So all of these things are happening, and I'm telling you now, like with the glaciers melting and the ice caps melting, and I'll also explain to you why, what I'm going to say, and then I'll explain why it's going to happen. The weather that we are used to, the normal weather in the globe, not just the United States, but around the globe, will never be the same again for 1,000 years. It has started to change, and it's got nothing to do with too many smokestacks, or not because cows are passing gas. It's none of that goofy stuff they introduced telling us about climate this and climate that. There's no question that it's changing, but the point is it's being affected by an external planetary intruder, Planet X or Nibiru or whatever, and we will not in our lifetime or your children's lifetime ever see the weather get back to what we would call normal cycle of seasons. It's not going to happen. It's going to be mixed up for the rest of 3 generations, at least, if not worse. Now, here's what's going to happen. And by the way, and let me explain to you part of it. There's those of you that are scientifically oriented, you're going to know this. It's old stuff, but for the rest of my friends out there that just haven't studied this, you may not realize this. There are huge circular, actually it's more like a figure 8 in the, I want to just talk about the East Coast right now, but from the North Pole down in the middle of the eastern Atlantic Ocean, there is a figure 8 of the water currents going all the way from as far north as above Alaska, the North Pole area, down and circling in a huge underwater circle or a figure 8, goes down all the way down to the Miami area where it's warm water. All right? And what happens normally, you have a certain amount of salt content. The salinity of the water itself has a specific amount. So it doesn't change much. This figure 8 underneath in the middle of the ocean, going all the way from the northern part of the, like I said, almost Alaska down to, or in Alaska, that's the west coast, but from the northern part above Maine and all up there in Canada, coming all the way down and down as far as Miami and back up. This huge figure 8 under the water. That's what constitutes the seasonal changes and the growth of normal storms. So your hurricanes and your storms and your northeasters during the winter and the bad hurricanes during hurricane season in the warmer weather, warmer water and all of that, that's pretty much on a regular schedule. But what's happening now with the melting of these glaciers, it is changing the percentage of salt, the solidity content, and that's going to completely booger up all of what we call the constant hurricane changes, the weather period of time when we're going to anticipate this storm or the northeasters and all of that. That's going to be all thrown in the trash. It's already happened because the solidity content is now being altered, and that's what's going on. And it's all part of that glacier melt. Look up on your computer, glacier melting. You put something in simple like for your search, just put in glacier melting more than usual, something like that. Just put a little question in, and it'll come up and it'll show you more things than you want to see. It's amazing, all right? And again, these are all things that I literally put in and told people to be aware of. This is what's going to happen as Nibiru or the Planet X comes closer. Now, next question people say, where is it going to come from? You know, where do we look for it? Well, and the problem is this. They don't know for sure. We will know this time when it comes because we have the ability to track these things now that we never had. The last time may have been 300 or 1,000 years ago. Obviously, there wasn't what we have now to keep track of it. What in terms of direction of where it may be coming from, if you put your arm out on the side of your from your body straight out to the right or the left, all right, and that would represent the plane of the ecliptic. That's the plane on which all of the planets circle and do their orbital thing around the sun, including the Earth and Venus planet, Pluto out the farthest, and et cetera, Mercury and all of them, pretty much give or take a few million miles up and down if you have your arm straight out. Now, if you put your arm down about half to your body, half of the way down, that would represent about a 30 or a 60 degree, 45 degree inclination off of that. Now, the Planet X Nibiru may be coming in on a 30 to 45 degree angle on its own orbital direction. And so it would be coming from the basement up towards the ceiling of your home on that 30 degree angle. And so it would not necessarily be coming straight in at us from our planetary plane of the ecliptic. So it could be coming, and if you put your hand up from straight out and put it up, raise it up halfway on a 45 degree angle, you would, it has a possibility of be coming up, down from an upwards direction. So we really don't know where it's going to be coming from. I guess that's the bottom line with that. It could be coming on its own plane, and if so, then that's that. Now, several years ago, in 1983, they sent out the first very long, real good telescope way out farther than we ever had before, and they were successful with it. And this was a period of time when my understanding is that Ronald Reagan was president, George Bush was vice president, although he was really running the ship, but he supposedly was vice president. But Ronald Reagan was president, and remember they did that thing called the Star Wars Initiative, which is where they put protective, supposedly all of these specialized satellites to keep track of what was where they could watch Russia and China, and they could spy down and all the rest of that on them. And it was called the Star Wars Initiative, and it included some ray guns and things of that sort, and all the new exotic equipment. When that period of time when they did it, that was when somebody came back in and said, "Uh-oh, Mr. President, remember Planet X that they talked about 50 years ago? We think we found it with that new satellite we've got way, way, way out there in our planetary system." And they've seen it, and it appears that something, we can't see it, but it's what we call an orbital perpetration, and that is that both Uranus and Neptune and some of these other bigger planets are being affected by something that we can't see really. We know it's huge because it would take a huge item to cause and affect this stuff. So that period of 1983, 84, 85, 86, and that was the period of time that I started getting involved with this myself, with the Iran-Contra stuff in 85, 87, all right? During that time was when the first realization, and that was when they activated the underground operations. They started digging and expanding every possible underground operation, which, by the way, it included the NORAD underground facilities. They literally emptied that out temporarily and went in and put the NORAD operations in another location for a while and expanded inside that granite mountain and turned that into one huge underground facility along with the rest of them. Now, also, what happened,
6 minutes.
the Vatican came to the United States.
6 minutes. I don't want you to run out of time. 6 minutes, Brother Bob.
Okay, so the Vatican actually came into Arizona, and we financed, and they oversaw it, an infrared giant telescope around that same period of time. And so even the Vatican and the Pope knows about it. Now, all of this stuff is in the incoming DVD. And let me do this, folks that may not want to deal or may like to drop me a note. My post office box, if you got a pen, grab it up, or a pencil and paper. I'll give you an address. You can go to the BobFletcherInvestigations.com. It does have the incoming DVD available. You can get it through there. If you wish to drop me a note and get a catalog of what we've got out there, it's Post Office Box 216, Bayview, Idaho. That's Box 216, Bayview, Idaho, 83803. 83803, and that's Bob Fletcher. Just drop me a note. I'll send you a little copy of the catalog if you don't want to get involved online with anything. But feel free to drop me a note if you will. The point is this. We put that together 2 years ago. It was out, released. All the things and so much more. Matter of fact, by the way, I have great pictures on my website of the underground facilities. The only good picture of Nibiru that was taken by a huge telescope several years ago and was dropped, blacked out on the space, Google Space. They blacked it out because they were yelled at by the government. The government, and let me ask you a question. Do we have another half an hour after this, or are we?
No, actually, we're down to 4 minutes. It shuts off.
Okay, that's
so
fine.
We're cut off a whole cold
fine.
stop at 4.
Okay, that's fine. What I was going to say is that the on the website there's tremendous pictures of this. None of the photographs that you're seeing randomly around of people seeing it and they want to know it. They see a big ball out there and they photographed it and it looks like Nibiru. That's not it. That's not going to happen, folks. By the time it gets that close, we're going to be flying apart. The waters are going to be yanked out of the ocean beds, and we're going to be just devastated. the tail of this thing is going to be unbelievable, and I'm sorry we've run out of time. I thought we were going to be on for another half an hour or so, but okay. Very good. That's all I can handle, I guess. Now, what do we got, 2 more minutes?
Yeah, again, it's bobfletcherinvestigations.com, right? Amen?
Right. That's correct.
Yeah, I cannot highly recommend Bob has done it one of the most, if not the single most comprehensive collection of confirmed data from multiple sources over tremendous periods of time that I have ever seen, and you will be powerfully blown away because every single thing that it.
And I simply want to say this. Hopefully I can get my next one out. It's going to be my last, and it's going to make the amazing information on the Nibiru incoming, it's going to make it look like totally small cheese, small time when you see my new expose, and I can't talk about it any more than that. God bless you, and God bless everybody, and make sure you tell Mom Happy Mother's Day.
Yeah, amen. Happy Mother's Day to everybody out there that is a mom. God bless you all. Thank you so much, Brother Bob, for joining us tonight. Again, a very powerful, edifying show, and just jam-packed full of facts. And I can confirm every single thing that you said, brother, and then some. Praise God. Very exciting. And we're coming up. The time is upon us. Nothing is slowed down. The only thing that's happened, Bob, and I think you would agree, is that we're just getting deluged with distractions from, I don't know, almost like a whack the dog playbook.
Right. It's totally garbage. It's like a magician telling you to watch his right hand while he picks your pocket with the left. It's absolutely garbage. There's nothing out there on regular news media that's worth even looking at. And God bless you for recognizing it. It's absolutely diversion and false baloney.
Yes, I couldn't have said it better myself. Awesome, Bob. Thank you so much again. Bob Fletcher Investigations. God bless you for joining us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Guy. Take care.
All right, bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the first hour of Late Night in the Midlands. To finish listening to this episode, go to lnmradionetwork.com and become a subscriber. Becoming a subscriber is easy. There is a link on every page to take you to the subscription page. The cost is low, and you would be supporting Late Night in the Midlands and all of our efforts to bring you the truth. Again, go to lnmradionetwork.com, click on the subscribe button, and you can finish listening to this episode as well as all of the other shows that are in our archives.